The attack by V'ger and subsequent failure of the Federation Class Refit program had Starfleet running scared. And out of this fear for the future, the Longbow Class would be born. But what do we know about this unusual tactical starship class? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Longbow Class to better understand its place in Star Trek history. Please note, yes, this is actually a beta canon design, or at least it started out as one. Doing all the research on the class and discovering its intended purpose, I decided to kit bash the 3D model into existence, and then modify it slightly to better fit the idea of its original creators. But of course, and as always, because this is just a bit of beta canon and fan fiction, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. The failure of the Federation Class Refit program had Starfleet Command worried. The original Federation class, launched in the 2260s, had for a short while, and at the time, been a symbol of Starfleet's strength and ingenuity, but also, and probably more importantly, it had been a deterrent to the Federation's enemies from declaring war upon the two organizations. But with the technological explosion of the early 2270s, the Federation class had become obsolete almost overnight. To make matters worse, due to the nature of the technology now being utilized by Starfleet, an attempted refit of the Federation class had produced a starship with no more strength than the Constitution class refit itself. The Klingon Empire, having engaged V'ger with a fleet of starships and then subsequent smaller wings of their newest Katinga-class starships, had also put the Empire on edge. Convinced that Starfleet and the Federation had somehow colluded with V'ger, would force the Klingon Empire to accelerate their own refit programs and strive for technological breakthroughs that could win a war against their old adversary. And so, almost immediately after the recall to space dock of the refit USS Federation, Starfleet Command would order its starship designers to take another look at the Constitution-class refit itself and develop a much stronger version of that class. And with this request, the Longbow Class would be born. Sitting at a length of 300 meters, the Longbow Class would be designed to be operated by 520 officers and crew members. The USS Longbow, a brand new from-the-ground-up constructed Constitution-class refit starship, would serve as this class's experimental prototype. As a result of Starfleet's rush to have the class tested, and hopefully declared a complete success, they would even forego finishing construction on a lot of the internal layout of the vessel, only completing the needed areas of the starship to test the proof of concept. Like the Constitution-class refit, the Longbow class was to have a standard safe cruising speed of warp factor 8, with an emergency maximum speed of warp factor 12 for 12-hour increments, all old warp scale of course. With the addition of several components to the starship's hull, the warp field would need to be enlarged. However, not wanting to sacrifice speed for tactical advantages, Starfleet's starship designers would develop a new pylon system, while simultaneously turning the Longbow class's nacelles on their side. And this elegant solution would allow the Longbow class to have relatively the same velocity specifications as her Constitution class refit cousin. In terms of tactical strength, many changes would be made to the class. The addition of a Miranda-style roll bar, along with her pulse phaser cannons and torpedo launching systems, would be added to the primary hull, while the newly developed Mega Phaser Lance would be added to her secondary hull, with two attached to her new pylon design facing forward, and one attached to the rear of the starship facing aft above the Longbow's shuttle bay. Standard dual phaser emitter banks, as well as torpedo launchers, would round out the arsenal of this design. Due to a phaser system issue experienced by the Starship Enterprise during her encounter with V'ger, All phaser systems aboard the Longbow would receive an upgrade of sorts that would become standard for the fleet, that of emergency phaser batteries. Before this point in the Constitution class redesign, phaser power had been increased by channeling the new phaser systems through the warp core itself. But due to this design, an unacceptable flaw was discovered, that if the warp core was malfunctioning or offline for any reason, the phaser systems would also be inoperable. And so, to combat this flaw, backup phaser batteries would be added to the system, which allowed a starship with an inactive warp core to still fire its phaser banks, although at a substantially decreased power level. Shielding for the Longbow class would be standard for the time, though an additional set of backup batteries would also be added to allow the Longbow class, theoretically, to remain in battle longer with its shields up. The USS Longbow would be launched for its shakedown cruise in 2274. In terms of velocity, the USS Longbow would perform as expected, achieving the warp goals set out by her designers. However, her tactical systems would be another story. Put simply, the USS Longbow was overgunned for a starship in its power class. At this point in Starfleet history, the Longbow utilized what was affectionately called the vertical warp core, the same core utilized by all other new Starfleet starship classes. And unfortunately, the amount of weaponry available to the class was too much for that core to handle. Attempts to fire its standard dual phaser emitter banks, in concert with its pulse phaser cannons, would inevitably cause one or more of the systems to fail, while a similar experiment to fire its standard phasers along with its new mega phaser lance would blow out the phaser relays entirely. But those weren't the only problems. Testing on the new mega phaser lance systems would be a complete failure on their own, with that system burning itself out after only one low-powered shot, which itself almost caused the warp core to breach in the process. Heading back to space dock, Starfleet's best and brightest would attempt to solve these issues, all to no avail. And although for a short while, the idea of running these systems simply off the phaser batteries themselves was toyed with, ultimately both Starfleet and its designers had to admit defeat, as the phaser battery technology of the time was simply not up to the task of producing the devastating strength required for the phaser lance to be an effective weapon. And so, by late 2275, the USS Longbow would follow suit of the USS Federation Refit, and be refit once again back to its Constitution class refit version, and sent out into active service. Setbacks like this were always expected by Starfleet, and Starfleet, with its vast resources and its even vaster imagination, would continue to experiment with new starship designs in an attempt to create vessel classes that could ensure the maximum protection of the United Federation of Planets. Created to be a tactical powerhouse but ultimately failing, the Longbow class was still an interesting and imaginative design, earning this class its footnote place in Starfleet history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the Longbow class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel create a tactical powerhouse starship design? Then consider becoming a channel member subscriber or a channel patron, both a major help that allows this channel to purchase resources and 3D models to keep it going. The link to both memberships is in the description below. Thanks again for watching, live long, and prosper.